Hey gamers, it's G from the corner, and today we're going to be talking about The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Now, this game came out just a few weeks ago, and I have been wrapping it up over the past few days, and I think it's about time I gave my thoughts on it, because I'm going to be honest, I absolutely adore this game. I think it is a fantastic title. You know, as somebody who has not been a long-time Zelda fan, who's only really finally dug deep into the series in the last few years, I have been very excited whenever there's been a new entry to play. Now, the only brand new entry since I really got into the series has been Tears of the Kingdom, but now, just a year and change later, we have The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, a 2D top-down Zelda, the first main single-player one in about 11 years now, but also the first mainline Zelda game where Zelda is actually the playable character. This is something that I've heard fans want for a very long time, and my response was always that, well, Zelda games take so long to make. I feel like it would be weird to kind of make one where Zelda is the main playable character, because then that becomes the entire brand identity for a long time. Just look at Breath of the Wild, right? Like, you know, Blue Tunic, all that aesthetic, that was supposed to be a one-time shakeup, but it's kind of become most of the series' modern-day iconography. I mean, this has been the mainline Zelda in people's minds for about, 8 years now, right? And Tears of the Kingdom is only going to exacerbate that, depending on how long it takes for the next game to come out. So I think it would have been weird if there was just a mainline Zelda where you play as Zelda and that becomes the series' identity for a long time. And then it's like, oh, we're back to Link. Like, I don't know. It would be weird, but I always thought, okay, maybe if you do a spin-off or they mess with the gameplay a bit, and that's exactly what they did. After developing the Link's Awakening remake and several other remakes for Nintendo, Grezzo got the opportunity to make a full mainline Zelda. This is the first time since Minish Cap that a mainline Zelda game has been handed off to another developer. And honestly, I could not tell. I've not played every Zelda, but I've played enough of them to know what Zelda feels like, and this game feels like a Zelda. All the races in here are very Zelda, and everything is very Zelda. This is, honestly, despite having a wildly different gameplay style and featuring a different playable character, this game feels very standard Zelda, but in a good way. It's not like how the new Super Mario Bros. Games are very generic Mario. This is the more so cozy kind of Zelda aesthetics and environments. Like, yeah, I want to see the Goron ruins and the Deku Forest and, you know, whatever other locations. Like, yeah, Zelda, cool. And with that, I suppose we get directly into the game itself, and first and foremost, the gameplay. Now, despite being the first mainline 2D Zelda and me calling it a very traditional Zelda game, the actual moment-to-moment gameplay itself is very unconventional. Unlike Link, Zelda does not have sword, shield, bombs, arrows, and all that. You're not going around getting items to upgrade your arsenal. You instead can spawn in things. You can clone almost any object or enemy you see at any point in time, or bind yourself to an object to move it, or move yourself in the same path the object is going. Very, very fun and interesting mechanics, if I'm being honest. The Echo mechanic feels built very similarly to Mario Odyssey's capture mechanic. There's so many things in the environment, and you get to utilize all of them with your own kind of control. There's a lot of unconventional objects that you end up getting to kind of maneuver and use to your liking. And I'll be honest, there is a lot of that open-ended puzzle solving that is found in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, where the game has a puzzle, but not necessarily a single right answer. A lot of times there are indeed multiple ways you can get around it, but not as many game-breaking ones as in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, with the sole exception of if you place down a bed and this tornado enemy, you can kind of go flying in the air, but that seems more like an unintentional bug that might get patched out by the time this video goes up. Now, this does mean that Zelda's arsenal is not as, let's say, upgradable as Link's was, in some sense of the word. It's not like you're getting major items that completely change how you want to explore the area in every dungeon you go to. You're getting a ton of echoes, but that's the thing. There's a ton of echoes in this game. You will keep progressing through the game and just find new objects or enemies to add to your arsenal at any point in the game. There's this really annoying, one row chart that you have to navigate to get to the echoes that you want to select. But actually, if you just pause the game and you go through one of the headers in the pause menu, you could just access every echo at once and just kind of scroll through. It's more of like an actual inventory, and that makes it a lot easier to go through. There really isn't that many when you're put into that perspective. But, as you progress, you'll find more enemies, more objects, stuff that'll help you in specific situations, but also stuff that will kind of become your new go-tos, Let's talk about combat real quick. So that's the thing. You can't fight people. You cannot shoot them with arrows or swords or whatever. You have to use your echoes to actually attack enemies. Now, there are plenty of ways you can go about combat. I know there are some people who have said, oh, well, actually, if you just do this one thing, that's not how the game works. I mean, maybe I'm really stupid or something, but in my mind, or in my playthrough at least, it took me a long time to find okay, this is a good idea for combat, There is one mid-boss in a temple that required me to kind of fight multiple strong enemies at once. So what I did was I used this armadillo that once you spawn it, he revs up and just bolts it crazy fast in the direction you're facing when you spawn it. And so I would kind of just shoot him at the other enemies on screen, But then I talked to a friend and he was like, oh, I did it a completely different way. There's so much versatility to the puzzle solving, but you still are upgrading your inventory. It's not like you have the same 3 abilities, Recall, Ultra Hand, Ascend, and you're just going to use those on everything. You keep getting new stuff that you're going to find more and more uses for as you play through the game. It's really good. I really like it, honestly. It's as if you go into a dungeon and instead of just getting one item that'll help you throughout that dungeon, you're getting like 5 or 6 of them. It's really cool, and it feels like traditional Zelda. And, I keep talking about dungeons. Yes, traditional Zelda dungeons are back. These are traditional in every sense of the word. They are labyrinths that you're trying to navigate. There's a boss key and a boss door. There's a mid-boss halfway through every dungeon. They're great. They're all fantastic dungeons. Even the water dungeon is really good. Something that wasn't really made clear in the marketing, but I guess I want to clear up since we're talking about game progression. This game is not open world. Unlike Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, you do have to tackle each dungeon in a specific order for the most part. You do the first dungeon and then you get a fork in the road. You pick one of 2 dungeons, and then after doing the 4th dungeon, you get another fork in the road and you can pick one of 3. That's nice. That's fine. And, it adds to some sort of open-endedness, but it's not really like fully open world. Like, the game knows what level you're going to be at, how strong you're going to be when you get to certain parts of the game. But as someone who, again, has been playing a lot of Zeldas in the last few years, this linear structure is super fun and enjoyable. I had a great time throughout the entirety of the game, going along the rails, so to speak, as I was meeting all of these colorful characters, Pretty much every main Zelda race, aside from the Ritos, are here and accounted for. Even some, like the Dekus, who haven't had major story significance in the franchise since, like, Majora's Mask. And all of them have great stories and lovable characters. I really like a lot of the new iterations of Zora, Goron, so-and-so that they introduced throughout this game, honestly. There's quite a few that are going to definitely stick with me in the future, and I'm going to be thinking back about when I think of, like, the best Zelda characters. On top of exploring the Hyrule mainlands and the dungeons, you're also going to find this new area called the Still World. It's essentially this game's Dark World equivalent, where it's not like an exact one-for-one copy of the main world, but there are these rifts appearing all over Hyrule, and you have to kind of try and seal them. The bigger rifts are where the dungeons are located, and they're part of the main story quests, but there's, like, plenty of optional ones. And these all kind of just involve you running around a small area, jumping, trying to navigate and defeat a few enemies, while you're trying to collect these kind of orbs that contain the little friends of the fairy companion character Tri, who will cover up the rift, Nothing too crazy. I will say, now that I'm talking about gameplay, I didn't really mention this, but there's a lot of 2D segments. The game is very clearly built off of Link's Awakening. Plenty of enemies are reused from there. Not to say that most of them are, but there are plenty that are reused. And the art style is also obviously the same. But another thing they borrowed were the 2D platforming segments. Now, these were only ever really in Link's Awakening, as far as I can recall. Maybe they're in the Oracles. I don't know. Somebody correct me on that if I'm wrong. But they're everywhere in this game. Again, Link's Awakening had a very small overworld. It was a Game Boy game. This game is like, 6 times the size or something ludicrous like that. So in this game, there are a lot of areas where you will just be thrusted into a 2D segment. Plenty of the dungeons have them, plenty of the overworld puzzles, and yes, plenty of those still world mini dungeons, so to speak, will have 2D segments. I'll be honest, some of them are alright, some of them aren't really that fun. Like, it's Zelda. Zelda in a kind of side-scroller format isn't the greatest thing in the world. There was one segment I really liked because it was a bit more action focused than the other ones, but you know, I take it or leave it, those 2D segments, they were just kind of whatever. And I suppose the final big gameplay thing I should really talk about is the sword fighter mode. This was kind of revealed towards the game's launch, but pretty early into the game, you will encounter a kind of duplicate evil Link, and then you'll defeat him and get his sword, and you'll be able to access sword fighter mode. It's really weird. Zelda can basically turn into a blue ghostly version of Link, and for a limited time has access to sword swings and other items and attacks you get later in the game. It's kind of a weird sort of thing. The whole point of the game is that it doesn't play like a traditional Zelda, but then here is the traditional Zelda gameplay just on a timer. It's really odd. But I'll be totally honest, I barely used it. Combat or mechanics like that in general, where it's like, oh, you can use this thing, but you only have it for a limited amount of time, really deters me from wanting to use it. Like, if I can do it without wasting my meter that is a finite resource and I can't very frequently build back up, then I'm just not going to use it. I used it for boss fights because there are very clearly patterns in most of them where it's like, oh, you spin them out and then you're supposed to go into sword fighter mode and wail on them for a little bit. That made the fights a lot easier and more manageable, but I'm sure they were all very much doable without it, and wouldn't even be that hard without it, if I'm being honest. But I guess this has led into a wider conversation now where I've heard this kind of discussion come up a bunch. I think I even talked about it a little bit on my own. People don't really like Zelda's gameplay style in this game, not even just because of what it is, but what it represents. Basically, the idea that it's kind of trying to say that Zelda isn't as capable as Link. I don't know how... It's a weird conversation to have, and I kind of want to have it real quick because I feel like it is important, and I want to kind of put my own 2 cents on it. The idea is that Zelda is kind of just summoning things. That is the entire gameplay, and the only time she is able to attack and be aggressive like Link is when she goes into a mode where she literally turns into Link, and it's only a limited time rage state, essentially. Now, here's the thing. A Zelda game where you play as Zelda and she is just Link sounds very stupid and not very exciting to me whatsoever. It's just like, hey, this is already... If I'm going to play a game like that, I might as well just be playing as Link. The idea would be that if you're playing as Zelda in a Zelda game, that's going to open up new gameplay opportunities, you know? A lot of people who think of playable Zelda, they think of Smash Brothers. And Zelda in Smash Brothers uses a lot of magic, you know? Din's Fire, the Reflector Shield, whatever it's even supposed to be. I have no idea, honestly. Things like that. But even that crowd was upset by this. It's like, oh, well, she can only do this magic because she gets a rod. She doesn't have any inherent built-in strength. You know, Link, he's just good with a sword and all sorts of other weapons, whereas Zelda, she doesn't even get to just be good with magic. But to that, I kind of say, well, Link always kind of just starts out as a scrub. The idea is that Link has been called to adventure and gets plenty of items along the way. Oh, but Zelda's constantly being tagged along with this fairy who's giving her strength via a rod. The same thing happens in other Zeldas. Obviously, Navi isn't lending Link power, but there are always companions. In fact, I think some of them, the character does lend Link power. Who's the one taming the wolf Link in Twilight Princess, you know? When you're using Midna's hair move on a bunch of guys when you're in that form. This isn't like if there was a Mario game where Peach is playable and she just couldn't, like, walk or jump, like she was a slower paced version of the game that made no sense. And it's like, oh, well, Peach couldn't just run and jump. What are you, silly? No, of course she could. That's why she's playable in Wonder. Like, you know, Zelda being playable in a mainline Zelda game means that you're going to do things differently. And they obviously had an interesting idea for 2D Zelda, and they said, why don't we just make this the game where Zelda's playable? Because that's what the people want. It would be weird if there was just a mainline 2D Zelda where the gameplay was completely different, but you were still playing as Link. People would probably have been asking for this to be a Zelda game if you were playing as Link in it. I'm very happy you're not playing as Link in it. I think it's such a cool thing that Zelda finally gets to be the main playable character in a Zelda game not developed by Philips. It's just really cool, and I'm happy I haven't seen anybody trying to cry woke over this. I mean, like, people have wanted Zelda being playable in Zelda for literal decades. Her name is in the game, so I'm glad nobody's tried to start an argument about that, although I can definitely tell some of the people detracting from this game would probably love to start that argument if they had any grounds to. Alright, with that all aside, tertiary things. The music is incredible. I am not the biggest Zelda soundtrack guy, but I always love very atmospheric areas in Zelda with good music, and Oh boy, some of the tracks in this game are earworms and are going on the playlist right away. I love the main version of the Hyrule Field theme. I love how as you progress, it kind of gets better, and it starts with Zelda's Lullaby riff once you get to the halfway mark of the game. It's a very, very nice, chill theme. I think it's a great kind of main theme of this Zelda game, you know? And of course, plenty of the other areas have great themes as well. I love the Jabul Waters music. There's a song that plays in the house of a character who I'm not going to reveal because his entire arc is just amazing and was the absolute highlight in this game's storytelling, but his house theme is pretty chill and relaxed. You know, I really love how this game feels. The look of the game is great. You know, it's the art style from Link's Awakening, just back and on a full Zelda. That game was only ever kind of a beach area. You know, you got to see like a bunch of beaches and maybe a forest or two in that art style. This game gets you the whole shebang. You got to see snowy mountains, the Goron volcanoes. I've said every Zelda race and their locations like 15 times in this video. You get the picture. This game is very pretty, although that does come at a little bit of a fault. We're near the end of the Switch's life cycle. I mean, I feel like I've been saying that forever now, but this time, like for real, we're at the end. We're in the final months. In a year, I think I can call this system kind of out the window, and we're focusing on greater, more powerful pastures. But holy, okay, Link's Awakening remake like 5 years ago would always try and aim for a constant 60 FPS, but it only ever hit this target like half the time when you were in the dungeons or caves. When you were out in the overworld, yeah, this game was chugging like crazy. It would barely hit 30. I mean, maybe some overworld areas looked better than others, but for the most part, it was kind of underwhelming. Granted, most of the game is spent in dungeons and caves, so it wasn't that noticeable, but in Echoes of Wisdom, oh my goodness, like everywhere there are frame dips. The game tries to hit 60 and will occasionally hit 60 in very small, simple rooms, but other than that, it's like sub 30 almost all of the time. Now, this didn't ruin my experience with the game personally, but I know there are plenty of people who will be pretty mildly disappointed by these frame rate hiccups. I mean, like, look, again, I think it's whatever. It didn't hurt the game for me. It's not like the game requires pixel perfect accuracy to where, ugh, frame dipped for a second, I died. That never happened, but it was a bit jarring, and, you know, maybe, hopefully, if there's some sort of smart delivery, visual enhancement, backwards compatibility system on the next console, these games will run better. Otherwise, just, you know, next time, hopefully the game will be better optimized. It's still a very pretty game. You know, it's not like the game looks bad. Like, stills of the game are gorgeous, but the issue just becomes how it runs on the console, which part of me wants to blame hardware, part of me wants to blame optimization. I'm not sure. Both are pretty at fault here, I think. I mean, it's been how many years of the Switch? We're still waiting on an announcement of this next console at the time of this recording, but whatever. That aside, is Echoes of Wisdom worth your time? Yes, it is. It's a very good game. It's a very, very good Zelda. Of all the Zeldas I've played, it's definitely in the upper echelon. I've not played every Zelda. I've never played Majora's Mask or Twilight Princess or most of the 2D ones. But I will say, it was the best 2D one I played this year. I played Minish Cap for the first time back in April, and I quite liked it, but I will admit that this game is plenty better, and probably is the best 2D Zelda. Or maybe Link Between Worlds, as I have to play that one still. There's quite a few Zeldas I've never played, but this is definitely in the upper echelon of ones I have played, and I highly recommend it. It's a good one. Yeah, that's all. Keep yourselves cornered for more Zelda, Nintendo, gaming, other things as well. And I will see you guys on the next one real soon. Later.